as we all know, Lyft and Uber are far from perfect. And especially this year in 2023, I gotta be honest, there's a lot of things I'm worried about. So in this video, I'm gonna talk about my 5 biggest concerns for Uber and Lyft for this year. Number 1, the pay. Let's just jump right into it. We know Uber and Lyft drivers don't get paid as much as they used to. I remember when I first started in 2014/2015, there really wasn't any talk about Uber and Lyft being bad. I mean, everybody loved it. We were getting paid a lot. There was a lot of excitement about being able to be your own boss, right? Lyft and Uber are still so new. A lot of people were like, wait, so you could just drive whenever you want and stop driving whenever you want? If you want to take the weekend off, you don't have to ask your boss or anything? No, the pay was amazing. However, now it is far from that. Now, of course, as I've mentioned in so many different videos, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. However, I will say this, because I feel like I have to look at both sides. On one end, I've met a lot of drivers and talked to a lot of drivers on this channel who say, Mark, I love driving because I'm making such good money. And there is, a huge section of drivers and huge collection of drivers who are making a lot of money. I mentioned before I was in Nashville, and the driver, this is like a couple years ago, said that they were making about $800 a day on Friday and Saturdays. When I was in Austin, Texas, I had a driver who said they were making over 6 figures driving for Uber because they just hit all the bonuses. They were in one of the top tiers on Uber as an Uber driver. They were making great money. And they were like, I love this. It's amazing. They were raving about it. And I've met a lot of drivers who do rave about it, even here in LA, However, there's a lot of drivers who hate the pay, and it is true. If you look at the trends, Uber and Lyft drivers just don't make that much money as they used to. Even now, which is super annoying in case you didn't know, in New York City, at least at the exact time of this video, there's a whole controversy going on. It's definitely a subject for a whole other video where they're trying to raise the rates for Uber and Lyft drivers and pay them more, and judges are blocking it. There's a lot of kind of little things going on, it's a huge mess, for lack of a better phrase. But that just shows what's really happening that's very annoying. I mean, even here in California, after Prop 22, drivers do get a minimum hourly guarantee, which is a nice, convenient cushion. So let's say if you go out and drive, and it's just a horrible day, or a horrible week even, Uber and Lyft have to bump you up to make sure you're getting the minimum hourly guarantee. But even still, if you get that, you're still not making that much money as we used to. And especially with rising costs, things like gas, maintenance on your car, oil changes, all the little things that come about with being a driver, it's getting a lot more cutthroat. And throughout everything I'm going to talk about in this video as well, the biggest thing right off the bat that a lot of drivers are like, hey, WTF is the low pay. And that's the biggest thing I'm concerned about. I don't know what's going to happen as the year continues, because as we all know, in addition, and this is important to look at, passengers are now spending way more money for an Uber or Lyft. And remember, if passengers start ordering taxis instead of Ubers and Lyfts, and then falls back on the drivers, a lot of drivers might not get those rides, might not make as much money as they used to, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very tricky scale to balance. I mean, I'm looking at this very similar to Airbnb. I remember Airbnb, and I feel like the kind of Uber and Lyft versus taxi situation is almost not identical, but similar, I feel like, when it comes to hotels and Airbnbs. Hotels were huge, obviously, and then Airbnb came about, and we're like, oh, Airbnb is awesome, it's the best, blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, wait a minute, I have to spend $200 a night, but there's a cleaning fee, so it brings it up to $250 a night, but I have to clean my own room and do all the dishes, but they're still charging me a cleaning fee on top. Wait, this is not making any sense. And a lot of people now are just going to hotels instead of Airbnbs, not only because the hassle of everything, but the price. I mean, Airbnb now is way more expensive, I feel like, than most hotels. And I will say this as a side note, I have done a video about this on my vlog channel. I feel like long-term Airbnb stays are so awesome. I'm going to be living again in Austin for the month of March this year. Super excited for that. And long-term Airbnb stays are still great. But even still, besides that, I don't think I'd ever stay in an Airbnb if it wasn't long-term. And then likewise, when you look at, Uber and Lyft and taxis, goes from Uber and Lyft to now back to taxis, taxis, then Uber and Lyft, and then taxis again. A lot of people now are saying, wow, it's just super expensive. I might as well just get a taxi. And a lot of times here in LA, I've gotten a taxi back and it's been cheaper. And Convenience depends on the situation and the kind of the stage of leaving you are in when it comes to that night. But I remember being outside, I couldn't get an Uber or Lyft. Even the ones that I could find were super expensive. There was a taxi right there, and I'm like, oh, let me just walk up to him, let me negotiate a little bit, and then boom, was able to get home. No issue. The pay, though, for both the passengers and the drivers is just horrible on both sides. And this is a big thing I'm concerned about in 2023 because I don't know how much longer that scale can exist. And if it doesn't get any better, number two, the employee status. This is something I've brought up a lot in all my kind of 2023 videos. I've already posted a bunch about should you be a driver in 2023? Is it worth it in 2023? The reasons why you should drive, the reasons why you shouldn't drive. And I've brought this up a lot. And this is something I will say, being honest, I have mixed feelings about because on one end, the employee status could actually help a lot of drivers. Like I mentioned, with Prop 22 happening, that would have not happened if it wasn't for people talking about, are you an independent contractor or an employee? And if it wasn't as a result of that, drivers would not get that minimum hourly guarantee that they now have. So that's a good thing. That's a very positive effect of this type of conversation, but it also brings up a lot of unique things. It depends on the city, on the state. There's a lot of things going on with this. And I feel like especially this year, it's going to be very interesting to see, even maybe on a federal level, if the government steps in and says, you know what, Uber and Lyft drivers, you're employees. We're done with all this kind of stuff going on. You're not independent contractors anymore. You're employees. That could have a huge ripple effect. How would it affect drivers and their pay and the whole landscape of ridesharing? Honestly, I don't know. Even here in California, not just Prop 22, now there's, which is kind of ironic, because I can't remember what the exact legal term is, and I believe the bill was AB 5, which kind of affected the way independent contractors can work here in California. The clause to that, or the exception, was Prop 22 for rideshare drivers specifically. Now there's a whole other thing going on right now where they're trying to appeal that almost to make then rideshare drivers employees. So that could happen here in California, maybe even this year, where actually you become an employee. How is that going to affect the landscape? I genuinely don't know. Could it be good? Could it be bad? Honestly, I think it could be a combination of the both. Of the two. I think the biggest thing that a lot of drivers are fearful of, and it's understandable, is the flexible schedule. Let's be honest, that's really the number one reason. I think for 90% of people signing up as a driver, you want to be flexible and drive whenever you want. Whether you are doing it as a second job, whether you're in school, whether you just want to drive to make more side cash for a vacation, just for whatever reason, for savings, whatever your reasoning is. And there's a lot of talk that if drivers become employees, you cannot do that flexible schedule anymore. Here's where things get weird though. I don't know. Because, for example, and I mentioned this in one of our videos, like a small thing, I won't mention the company because they did go under, I will say that. And I remember in Boston, I signed up with this company. I was an employee, so I was classified as an actual employee. However, for this company, it was a completely flexible schedule. It was pretty much the same as Uber and Lyft. Basically, this company was a combination of a delivery service like Uber Eats with where you could deliver pretty much anything. So someone could order a TV, a cheeseburger, an iPhone charger, whatever they wanted, and I would deliver it to them, and it was a flexible schedule. And I remember thinking wow, interesting. So I don't really have to keep track of my taxes as much as Uber and Lyft because I'm an employee, yet I still can work on a flexible schedule. So I will say, I feel like for Uber and Lyft, them saying, oh, if you become an employee, no more flexible schedule, I feel like that's a bit of a scare tactic. I'm going to be honest, I feel like there's a way they could work around it and implement a new system or whatever. So I will say that as a side note, because that is the biggest concern, I think, for most drivers becoming employees. Another thing is it depends upon the taxes. This is a very nitty-gritty accounting thing. For me personally, right now, I'm both a YouTuber and a DJ and electronic musician. So my life, everything I do, I basically pay taxes at the end of the year, which I'm already getting ready to do in the next few months, at least at the time of this video. And one big thing is I actually love that. I love the fact that I pay taxes and I write off all this stuff off. And in addition, I don't get taxes taken out. I know this is getting very math heavy. I'm a former accountant, in case you didn't know, but I'm not your accountant. I want to say that. But I personally look at the fact that if you do get taxes taken out of your paycheck, you're essentially giving the government a no interest free loan in a sense. Within reason, you could argue that, again, more of an accounting subject. But for me, I actually like being self-employed and being an independent contractor. Same thing with Uber and Lyft. I think the accounting works out a little bit better. But also for some people, let's say you're not accounting heavy or math heavy, it is kind of convenient knowing you don't have to save a bunch of money and then calculate at the end of the year how much you made, what was your miles, what was your write-offs, oh shoot, where are all my receipts again? So it does get kind of tricky, but this all comes back in play about the employee status. Are you an independent contractor or employee? Either way, I'm gonna be honest, either way it goes, it's gonna have a gigantic ripple effect. It could be good, it could be bad, or a combination. That's something we'll have to see. Number 3 is deactivation. This is something that's happened a lot more, I've noticed, and I've not really talked about it a lot in some of my videos, but I feel like I want to start talking about it more because I've gotten a lot of comments of people saying, hey Mark, I was driving, I had a minor dispute with a passenger because they did X, Y, and Z. Now I'm banned for driving for Lyft and Uber, period. Now this kind of involves what I talked about the employee status. Remember, again, one negative aspect of being an independent contractor is you don't get a lot of protection. So if Uber and Lyft, if let's say one day you wake up and for no reason to you, let's say there wasn't even a dispute, let's say there was a glitch, or let's say just for whatever reason, you wake up and boom, Uber and Lyft says, hey, sorry, you can't drive anymore. We've deactivated your account. Sorry. Not saying there's not a lot you can do, but there's not a lot you can do, right? I mean, you can argue it and everything, but that is a very scary thought. That let's say, especially if you're driving full time, you're paying bills with Uber and Lyft, you're putting food on the table for you and your family, and then you wake up and that happens one day, that's gonna be a tricky thing. And that's why I always suggest to every driver out there, if you do happen to have a dispute with a passenger, something goes wrong, even if it's minor or major or anywhere in between, I always suggest contact Lyft and Uber immediately. I feel like this is just not only being a driver, but I think being a person, there is something that makes it a lot better. Let's say you contact them saying, hey, I just want to contact you and let you know what happened. Here's the situation. I just want to let you know right away. That's a lot better than, let's say, you having to be on the defense. Where Uber and Lyft says, hey, this passenger complained about you and they said you do this and this. Like, can you explain what happened? And you're like, no. Like I swear that's not what happened. Here's the real story. And now you're kind of, your back's against the wall and you're trying to explain to them what really happened, blah, blah, blah. That is the last position you want to be in. You're always better off doing, and I did a pro tip video about this. I call it first contact. You're always better off having first contact. And I feel like a lot of situations too, not just ride sharing, but pretty much anything in life, there's like a weird quasi-legal thing that could get you in trouble. Not a bad idea, just to kind of state something, give something out on record, just to kind of state your claim. But even besides the point with that, even if, like, say, nothing happens, you still could get deactivated. This is something I'm hoping this year maybe gets a little better because it is rare. I will say that. Like, I don't want to scare any driver about this, but it is something that can happen to a lot of drivers. I've gotten a lot of comments on this channel of people saying, yeah, Mark, I was driving and woke up the next day and I just couldn't drive anymore with no explanation. And it took me 2 or 3 weeks to get my account reactivated. And they didn't really have a reason why. They just said, sorry, yeah, you can drive again. And that's it. It is super annoying, super frustrating, especially, like I said, for full-time drivers who are just relying on this income. It is annoying that Uber and Lyft can do that, whether it's your fault or not, and whether it's a glitch or not, that it can just randomly happen. I'm hoping this year it gets better, because what I've noticed is it seemed like it's been getting worse. And I think this brings up another kind of subtle but important subject, and that is that Uber and Lyft in general are treating their drivers worse. I kind of touched upon this in the pay situation in the beginning of this video, not only with pay, but the way they're treating them. To Uber and Lyft, and I hate to say it, I'm not saying it's right, but just from a logical perspective, it makes some sense that to Uber and Lyft, they'd much rather side with a customer than a driver. I think to Uber and Lyft, they're like, hey, well, this customer's paying money. The customer's always right, which is not true. Anyone who's worked in customer service, not only when it comes to driving for Lyft and Uber, I also used to be a bartender. The customer, yeah, that's not true. The customer is definitely not always right. We know that, but from a business capitalistic perspective, they kind of favor the customer more than the driver, and this leads them to treating the driver worsely, which then leads to the fact of them saying, oh, you know what? If we can't trust this driver, even if it's like a bad logical reasoning or whatever, we'll just deactivate them, no big deal, because we'll just find another driver. I hope this changes. Number 4, rentals. Now, this one is tricky because I've seen this been getting worse over the years, especially when you involve the pay, which I'll kind of touch upon that because they're very interconnected. And in some ways, might as well start off here, I think it's good. I think it's good that, let's say, if you have a car but it doesn't qualify, if you have a car but you just don't want to put the miles and depreciation on it, the wear and tear on it, or let's say if you don't have a car at all, you can rent a car through Uber and Lyft, and drive. I think this is a good position too. Like say if you want to start making a ton of money, and remember, like I said in other videos, within reason, you kind of have an unlimited amount of hours you can drive. There is, I will say, a limitation, not to contradict myself, but it's something like 12-ish hours a day. So let's say if you want to drive 80 hours in a week and go crazy, make a ton of money, you can do that. And remember, you have instant cash outs as well. And so let's say you're like really tight on money, you don't have a car, you're like, it's kind of that weird paradox. You're like, I need a car to work, but I need to work to get the car. Like, what do I do? You can rent a car through Uber and Lyft, start driving, make money, etc., which is good. That's a very good thing. I gotta be honest. On the flip side, though, it's weird how the rentals have evolved. Now, back in the day, the first, if my memory is correct, the first app that had a rental program was Lyft. It was called Express Drive. It still is called Express Drive. Might as well say that. But in the beginning, which is kind of crazy to think about this is maybe now 2015/2016. In the beginning, they had a weird, unique program, which I thought was kind of cool, where the more that you drive, the less money you have to spend. And I remember that, I believe, if my memory's correctly, if you did over 63 rides in a week, so 63 rides or more, so it's by rides, you get that rental for free. I mean, not necessarily for free, but you don't have to pay that weekly fee. So if you want to drive full time and you don't have a car, that's pretty insane. You're like, wait, I can just drive 63 rides. I usually say about 2-ish rides an hour is usually the hourly average for rides, I say to most people. So you're looking at about 30-ish hours a week. You drive 30 hours a week. You don't have to spend any money for that vehicle at all. And you get literally 100% profit. I mean, obviously Lyft takes their cut, but if you look at that from a rental perspective, you're not spending any money to rent that car. That's actually pretty awesome. And then over time, probably because the math didn't work out for them, they're like, yeah, you know what? We're not doing that anymore. And then they started charging, and obviously, the rates have gone up and up, as I've noticed. But now you're looking on average at about $200 to $300 a week to rent a car. That is kind of annoying that you're kind of starting, and I've mentioned this before in so many other videos, you're starting in the hole. So let's say, to make numbers even, you rent a car for $250 a week. Well, that means if you drive, and let's say, again, using the math out, let's say you do, I don't know, I think on average for most drivers, it does depend, I'd say about $20 an hour is the average rate. So let's just say $260, right? Which means you have to do 13 hours. Let's say, again, your car rental, to get in some math, car rental is $260 a week. Then you want to break even. You're getting $20 an hour, which depending on where you are is more or less than the average. Now you're looking at driving 13 hours in that week just to break even. So if you, let's say, want to do this part-time, and part-time for most traditional kind of numbers is about 20 hours a week, that means only 7 of those hours a week are actual profit. The other 13 is just to pay off that car. And then you repeat this again and again and again. Even here in LA, I remember that when Tesla first came out, when it comes to the Uber and Tesla rental situation, and I have done a video about this, there is a lot of statistics to show if you drive a Tesla, especially here in LA, you make significantly more money than another vehicle, especially if you can get those Uber Black rides, which I mean, not Uber Black, like the Uber Lux rides and the luxury options and blah, blah, blah. That's pretty great. But the problem is I remember when I first saw that, when Uber first contacted me saying, hey, Mark, you should do this, it was $300 a week or $1,200 a month. And I remember thinking, like, you know what? I'm not going to spend about $200, I think last time I checked, $220 for a normal vehicle. For an extra $80 a week to have a Tesla, one, that's kind of cool. I'm not going to lie, I like Teslas. But two, I know I can make way more money. However, though, I was just talking to a driver this weekend, and I was like, oh yeah, what is it? It's $1,200 a month to rent the Tesla? And he goes, not anymore. He goes, no, it's $1,500 a month. $1,500 is a lot, and almost forces you in a weird position to then have to drive full time. And now, especially then when you combine all the expenses, like I mentioned, you still have to, of course, pay for gas. Obviously, if you have a Tesla, you just charge it, but you still have to pay for gas, maintenance on the car, you still have to pay for all that kind of stuff. In addition, when you combine this with pay as well, the fact that you're getting paid less, so you're having to shell out more money for the rental while getting paid less, so it's kind of squeezing you financially. And then with the kind of, seems like, increased rate of deactivations, tough to say, right? And I think that's for something that's gonna, I hope maybe throughout this year, they kind of figure out a better program. I will say, like I said, I do like the rental idea. I think it's a phenomenal idea for somebody to just get immediately out there and start making money. And if you want to work your butt off and pay off a bunch of debt, whatever, you can definitely do that. But with the pay going down, costs going up, and rentals going up, it's getting a lot more tricky. And last, but definitely not least, number 5, Uber versus Lyft. I have done like a full in-depth video about this. This has been concerning me that over time I've noticed from numerous different angles, Uber has been slowly taking over. Before it was almost Uber and Lyft. I never really looked at it from, I think a lot of drivers also looked at it from Uber versus Lyft, but I never really looked at one being better than another in terms of one taking over. In my opinion, it was like, let's say in 2016 or 17, there was like a 0.00001% chance that Uber or Lyft would take over and it would just be Uber and just Lyft and the other one would be gone. There was like a 0.001% chance. Now though, I feel like that's gone up to like, I don't know, maybe like a 5% chance, which I know is still low, but as time has gone up, that kind of percentage, so to speak, to me has increased, meaning there's more of a chance now of there only being one. And in my opinion, let's be blunt, it would definitely be Uber. I don't see Lyft ever overtaking Uber unless something changes, and that could definitely happen. But at least the way things are looking, Uber's revenue has been increasing a lot. Lyft, it's still kind of, it's tricky. And I did like a revenue kind of analysis on this channel, like I said. It's very tricky to see that. And in addition, I mentioned this before, taking kind of a side note when it comes to Amazon and then bringing it back to Uber. Amazon started as like a bookstore online. You could buy books or whatever. Now Amazon does everything. They own Whole Foods, right? So Amazon is not just a bookstore. It's almost like I was going to say a store. I know that sounds kind of cheesy. But yeah, it's kind of like an online store where you could buy anything. Likewise, Uber started as a ride-sharing app. You get a rideshare. Now though, and I've mentioned this before, I'm looking at it as an on-demand service app. If let's say I want to rent a parking spot, I can do that. If I want to get a car, I can do that. If I want to have a driver chauffeur me around called Uber Hourly, I can do that. If let's say I want to book hotels or concert tickets or something at a restaurant, I have Uber Explore. If I want to book a party bus, which I still feel like, I'm not gonna lie, it's a pretty cool idea. I know some people may hate it or love it. It's called Uber Charter. I think that's kind of a cool idea. If I want to book a party bus, I can see rates right away. I can split the fare as well with all my friends. Pretty cool. So Uber has all these features they're kind of unveiling. It's getting kind of ridiculous. And they just now have, what is it called? Uber Shop and Go or Shop and Pay. I can't remember what it's called, but basically it's them rivaling Instacart, where now you can get groceries. Someone will pick them out for you, et cetera, et cetera. So Uber's doing so much, and they're growing so much, especially putting their hands in so many different industries. I didn't even mention Uber Eats yet really as much on this entire video. Like they have their hands in so many different pockets and in so many different industries. They're quickly taking over. And one of my biggest concerns is what would happen if, for whatever reason, Uber truly takes over Lyft. What would happen then? I feel like it's been getting worse and worse. And I hate to say it, because I do love Lyft. If let's say Uber ever did that, like let's say 6 months from the time of this video, it pops up on a newspaper, online, wherever I see it, and it says Uber has officially bought Lyft, it wouldn't surprise me. Last year, I think it would have, or the year before, or any of the years before. This year would be the first year that I wouldn't be like, wow, I didn't see that coming. I'd be like, yeah, I'm not fully surprised. And that really worries me. Now, what would happen? Tough to say, right? Would Uber keep Lyft in existence and just own them and they both still exist? I think that'd be kind of at least the best case scenario of the worst case scenario. But at the same time, like I said, they would have an entire monopolization over this entire ride-sharing industry where they could set the rates however they want, no matter how ridiculous they are. There are some new ride-sharing apps coming about, like Empower is one of them I just did a video about. Some of them look promising. I will say Empower does. And I have no affiliation with them, by the way. But it's only, like, say, in Washington, D.C. and, like, I think North Carolina and New York. I find for most ride-sharing companies, they start out in a very specific location and then branch out, which makes the most sense because trying to take over the country versus Uber and Lyft, impossible. But in a very specific segment, in a very specific area, a lot more feasible, in my opinion. However, still tricky. I mentioned before in other videos that there was a company called Faston in Boston that was promising, hey, for all drivers, you're going to make more money driving. For all passengers, you're going to have to spend less money for that ride. Faston went under, I think, after 2 or 3 years. I don't know what it was. So it is very tricky to make a new ride-sharing company and app and everything. It's very difficult to get that market share. And then when you combine this with the fact that Uber seems to be taking over more and more, I'm just worried that if, like, say they do take over Lyft, will they pay drivers even less than they're paying now? Will passengers and people ordering it have to then pay even more than they're paying now? That could be, I'm not saying the end of ride sharing. That's a very dramatic YouTube clickbait thing to say, like, it's the end of ride sharing. But it definitely would switch up the game a lot, and definitely not for the better.